we are, episode 19 of Merriwether's World. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Merriwether Vorderbruggen, and as usual, we are joined with the amazing Merriwether, my daughter. Just a note, remember, she's been taught how to poison people since pretty much the beginning of her life, so you don't want to mess with her. This is why you came, the presentation, medicinal weeds and wildflowers of Texas and less important spaces and places. Like I said, I think this is week 5 of this, and I think we'll probably have 2 or 3 more weeks to go. So let's get going, if we will. First one, oh yeah, so you can find the medicinal plants and books and gear that I reference and talk about in these presentations, the ones that I've used to train myself in the art of herbal medicine, over at the amazon.com/shop/foraging Texas, and then just scroll down to the herbal medicine making section, if you will. Thank you. Side note, I get about 6% of the sales price of anything you buy from there. It doesn't add to your price, it subtracts from Amazon and gives it to me. So, billion-dollar company, little weed-eating me and Merriwether. Who you gonna call? All right, enough of that. Like I said, while you're really here, let's talk plants. If you're up around, really from Houston up through Bastrop and up into the hill country, right now, this time of year, the stinging nettle is out. Now, if you're familiar with the normal stinging nettle find up north, it's actually a very tall plant. The northern stinging nettle is a very tall plant with very long leaves. The Texas stinging nettle, unlike most things in Texas, the Texas stinging nettle is actually quite small. The plant itself usually doesn't get above 18 inches tall. The leaves, individual leaves, are a little bit bigger than my thumb, but it still packs a wallop with the sting. Now, this wallop does have some medicinal properties. So, the difference between pain and medicine is tolerance, I guess. The leaves themselves are an anti-inflammatory. So what this means, if you have some swelling going on or some swelling issues, basically stabbing yourself with the stinging nettle, the irritant from that is a counter-inflammatory and will help with that. If you eat the leaves or drink the leaves in the form of a tisane, it is a diuretic, so it will help you flush your body and your kidneys and your bladder out of infections or help perhaps pass kidney stones. At least you're producing a lot of urine, so it's going to help flush things out. It's a local anesthetic. That same irritant, it basically overloads the nerve cells, and you feel a big stabbing amount of pain, but the nerve cells then just kind of deaden. They go, well, you know what? We've used up all the chemical we need to signal pain, so we're just going to do this little low trickle of pain rather than the big wave of pain you would normally be feeling without being stabbed by the stinging nettle. And finally, crushed up and used as a poultice, it does help stop bleeding when applied to open wounds, fresh wounds. It has some vasoconstrictor properties that will help kind of shut down the smaller blood vessels. In the case of arterial blood, if you're shooting blood into the air, not going to help much with that. But for your basic, figure like nosebleed level type wounds, the stinging nettle is going to help crushed up and applied there, or used as a wash. So the tisane, that's where you crush up the leaves and soak them in hot water for a while. Ideally, you want to use the dried leaves for tisane. In the case of stinging nettle, the fresh leaves also work and might be a little more potent just because a lot of the irritant from the stinging nettle is available when the plant is green, but as it dries, it kind of dissipates, it self-destructs. So like the anti-inflammatory and local anesthetic, you would want the fresh ones. Whereas the diuretic, the anti-diarrheal, the stop bleeding, you can use fresh or dried. But when you're making the tea or a tisane, dried is really the best. For flushing out the kidneys, the diuretic form, I would definitely use the dried. Like I said, you find this in the winter, spring areas. It likes shady, moist areas, so in the woods, right along the edge of woods, I generally find it more around hardwoods, kind of along streams and riverbanks cutting through the woods rather than more pine foresty type things. So keep that in mind. Look for it in the river bottoms and ravine sides, things where there's usually some water flowing through. It seems to like some moisture. Any questions?
Thus far, no, but usually like a couple pop up right after I say that, so just have to wait and see.
All right. Well, let's just move on then, and we can always go backwards. That's the cool thing about technology. Next one up is red clover. Now, I'll admit red clover, first off, it's different than crimson clover. Crimson clover has a much longer flower head, and it is a dark red, kind of like the inside of Dracula's cape sort of red. The red clover has a round flower, and it's more purple than red, but for some reason they call it red clover. As far as the Houston area, a little rare once you get more out past Waco and up in the Jasper area, Tyler, Hill Country, Enchanted Rock area, you're more likely to find it. And why do you want to find it? Because it's amazingly good, especially if you are female. The flowers contain an estrogen mimic that helps stabilize again the female hormonal cycle. Important safety note though, if you have an estrogen receptor positive tumor, and your doctor will tell you if you have that, if you find out that, you don't want to use red clover because it will basically trigger the cancer, the tumor to grow even larger, because it does work like estrogen. The estrogen receptor positive tumors are triggered by estrogen or speed up their growth. So if you know you have an estrogen receptor positive tumor cancer, don't use the red clover. So you got the estrogen mimic that will help like with the PMS and hot flashes and those sort of issues with the female hormonal cycle. It is an antioxidant, and remember, in most cases, an antioxidant means it helps clean out the free radicals that want to damage your DNA, which can then lead to cancer. So even though the red clover is an antioxidant, which generally is thought to help prevent cancers, again, in the case of the estrogen receptor positive cancer or tumors, the cancer has already started, so some other thing has triggered the damage. Same with the anti-tumor effects. Most other tumors, or a lot of other tumors, there's been some really fascinating results and some scientific studies. Like I said, I use the researchgate.net to track down scientific studies of what's going on in the medical plant or the medicinal plant world. But the red clover, the extracts from the flower, seem to have anti-tumor properties, again, except for the estrogen receptor plus tumor. It is an antispasmodic, in that it helps, like if you're in the grand mal seizure, it's not going to help with that. But as a tea, just to reduce the chance of a spasmodic event, it can help there. The tea also, or tisane, is an expectorant. So if you have a really congested lungs and lung cheese in your throat and all this stuff and you're trying to cough it up, the hot red clover tea will help loosen the phlegm and dislodge it from the bronchial tube so you can expectorate it, which is a fancy word of saying spit it out. The anti-inflammatory, again, the tea also helps with the swellings, both from like sprains and strains. Bye, honey. Sprains, strains, things like that, but also offers some minor relief in the case of inflammatory diseases. Now, the study into things like lupus and so forth have just begun, but the initial studies look promising. But again, at this point, Western medication probably has better things to help you with there. But again, it's one of those things that it won't hurt you to add it. But if you do add the red clover as a supplemental herbal medicine in the treatment of inflammatory diseases, please let your doctor know. Finally, it is a wound healer. So it helps speed up the tissue repair process. It basically tells the cells that thing you're doing right now to heal that wound, do more of it and do it quickly. So it speeds up the wound healing. So a good wash with a tisane made from the red clover will help speed up wound healing, which is really, really handy. Where do you find it in Texas? Usually in open fields and slightly disturbed areas. It seems to like, say, like the fence line back along baseball fields, parks where you normally can't harvest it, but even yards, fence lines, places like that. So places that are close to areas that get mowed, but it itself doesn't get mowed every, twice a week for all the time. It is a winter through summer plant, so you can start looking for it now. Set up in the hill country and East Texas, Jackson and Tyler, Athens. You might be able to find some up there. I want to say Vidor, there's been some there. But just keep looking at it and it'll just be blooming until the real hot summer arrives, which unfortunately here is really May, June sort of thing. Now, if you're up north after the snow leaves and the temperatures, raise 100 degrees to get above freezing, which is why I'm in Texas, look for it during the summer months. But down here in Texas, winter into the early parts of the summer. Okay, how are we on questions?
We actually have a couple questions.
Excellent.
First, I heard the flower when dried makes a good tobacco substitute. Thoughts?
Yes, the red clover actually does make a good herbal smoke. I've tried it both by itself, mixed with some other plants like betony and some wild mint, and it's actually fairly mellow. The slight harsh edge, but for the most part, it's actually quite good. Both the red clover and the white clover. I have not tried the crimson clover. What else do we have?
I'm not sure what they were mentioning, but the person asks, so I guess it comes out in the urine?
Okay, I'm not sure if they're talking, unless the kidney stone probably. So the diuretic, if you are taking a diuretic to help flush out the kidneys and the bladder, that will increase the pressure on the kidney stone and help force it out that much more quickly, but still very, very painfully. Anything else?
Nope.
No more. All right. Moving on. Wild bergamot. So this is a great plant. This is all over, basically starting in Houston or even south of Houston. I've seen it down in Corpus and going all the way up into Canada. This has a whole bunch of useful medicinal properties, used as a poultice. So a poultice, remember, that's when you smash up the plant and put it on your skin somewhere where there might be an irritation or inflammation, or drank as a tea when the herbalists talk about a non-Sensanea plant containing tea. They actually call it a tisane. So the flowers, leaves, and stem, pretty much all the aerial parts of the wild bergamot. It's used as a poultice or as a wash to soothe skin inflammations, whether it be an insect bite, fire ant bite, wasp sting, minor sunburn, minor burns, anything where the skin is feeling red and painful. It is antibacterial, so it contains a bit of thymol and some other antibiotics that will kill the bacteria. So a wash used to flush out a wound will reduce the chance of an infection. It helps soothe indigestion. If you nibble on a bit of this plant, it especially helps with the bloating and gas and just overeating effects. So I'm not sure if it triggers any bile production to help digest the food in you, but it does help with the bloating feeling and the kind of a acidic-y sort of thing going on. So I'm guessing it does not trigger production of bile because it almost soothes some of the stomach acid issues. It is a sweat inducer. So as far as inducing sweat, usually that's not a problem in Texas. Occasionally people will want to sweat out, either they feel it will help with toxins or detoxify, even help with colds and flu symptoms a little bit. Excuse me, my nose is itching. but it will help cause you to sweat. One theory is that it may help in hot weather to basically start you sweating more quickly than you normally would. Because remember, the purpose of the sweat is help remove heat from your body. So if you're sweating a lot, it helps keep you cool in hot weather as long as you are drinking enough water to replace what you're sweating out. It is a mild stimulant, so not like speed or meth or anything like that. Not even like caffeine so much, but it will help perk you up a bit. A nice cup of wild bergamot tea, especially mixed with something caffeine containing, such as Yopon holly, would be a good, morning tea or a mid-afternoon tea just to help pep you up a bit. Diuretic. So if you are using, or if you're suffering from kidney stones, for that, it will help flush that out. Bladder infection, kidney infection, urinary tract infections, where you just want to try and flush as much material out. The wild bergamot tea will help trigger the body production of urine. Remember, if you're doing that, you want to drink a lot of water. It does have some pain relief offerings, both as a poultice and as a tisane, especially in like a sprain or a strain, it may help. I would rate willow bark above wild bergamot for pain relief, but it is there, and it might be, remember, with aspirin, even from willow bark, you cannot give that to kids under the age of 12. But the wild bergamot, there's no issue there. It's not an aspirin-based pain relief. Expectorant, we already talked about that. If you have a bunch of lung cheese from some sort of cold cough sort of thing, it will help loosen the phlegm and help you expel it. It will help reduce headaches. I think part of that is, along with the stimulant part, I think it's actually sending more blood to the brain and helping kind of take out some of the pressure from the brain. But they've shown that the wild bergamot tea will help with headaches. As far as migraines go, I don't really have any data on that, but I know from most migraine sufferers, they're willing to try anything. So what do you have to lose? Maybe try some wild bergamot tea when you first get those early tingles. It may help there. Fever reducer. So if you are suffering from a fever, think of this as like a non-aspirin aspirin that you can take. And then finally, the tea will help soothe the sore throat. I'm assuming some of the pain relief thing will work topically and just soothe the inflammations in the throat and make it feel better. So drinking the tea or even just gargling with the tea, but I would recommend drinking the tea to get all the medicinal properties from it. Where you find this, or you find this out in fields again, you can find it and grow it as a landscaping plant. A number of times I've seen it at Lowe's and Home Depot, but when they're selling it, they're probably here in Texas, or at least in Houston, they're probably going to be start selling it pretty soon, because this is a spring to summertime plant. It doesn't like the cold weather. It prefers the warm weather, and if you can give it enough water, it will help it stay longer. Ideally, though, if you're trying to keep it all summer long, I would aim for the north or east side of the house to plant it. But in the wild, look for it in ditches and in fields and in open areas. It generally likes sun and maybe just a hint of shade, so not right up against the border of woods, but where like the afternoon summer sun would cast it into shade. So if the sun's in the west, it would want to be kind of on the east side of the woods there. That's where you'll find it. Beautiful plant, lots of medicinal uses. Questions?
Lots, actually.
All right.
So to start, is dried bergamot okay?
Yes, the dried bergamot is absolutely fine. You can dry the flowers, the leaves, the stem, all that. Remember, let it hang and dry naturally for at least 2 weeks to break down the cell wall, and then you're good to go. What else?
All right, I take an anticholinergic and have trouble sweating. Could this help, and in what form? For example, tea.
Okay, it should help with the sweating, but I'm not sure if there are any complications or incompatibilities with the medication you are on. I recommend looking it up on webmd.com and just double check to see if there's any reason why the wild bergamot can't be taken with your particular medications. Next.
Is this different from bee balm?
It is, oops, you don't want to look at me. It is in the same family as bee balm, but it is slightly different. It's a different leaf structure. The bee balm usually has several clusters of those Muppet-looking flower clusters, whereas wild bergamot just ends in the flower cluster. Others?
Can you develop a resistance after continued use?
That's a good question. I would suspect that you can, just because the human body is generally very adaptable even when it works against us. So if you are constantly taking a sleep aid, for instance, the body will eventually require more and more of that sleep aid. Same with painkillers and everything else. The body thermostat, kind of set, or maybe not the thermostat because that would be temperature, but the body, like say the dopamine and serotonin and the other brain chemistry, so forth, if it's constantly being supplemented, it can kind of reduce the natural amount. Long story short, yes, there's the chance that you could, need a higher and higher dose to get the effect. Anything else?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good.
I get the spotted type of Monarda around me. Does it have the same properties?
Okay, the spotted one we talked about several weeks ago. If you go to the Foraging Texas website, www.foragingtexas.com, hey, you know what? We can do that. And scroll down to, so if this is the one you have, I'm sorry, it's a little trigger. It has a lot of the same medicinal properties. It is even a better antibacterial than the wild bergamot. It's significantly stronger. Same chemical, just a much higher concentration. Side note, frankly, the tea made from the horse mint or the bee balm, made from the flowers in particular, is a little rough on the taste buds. It's one of the reasons it's called horse mint is quite a few people think the flower in particular smells very much like a sweaty horse. So keep that in mind. But medicinally, it's I would actually put it above the wild bergamot for everything, but in particular, the antibacterial properties. Okay, anything else?
Nope.
All right, back to the presentation. Wild lettuce. So this is popping up all over right now. It's still in the very early stages of growth where it's mainly just a flat plant. It hasn't grown up tall. This plant can actually get, in the picture here, what you see standing next to me, I'm 6'5", and this is probably 2/3 of the way through its lifespan. They can get 8-9 feet tall in ideal situations. Very, very, very tall. So we have 3 species here, the Ceriola, the Candonesis, and the Floridana stuff. I hate Latin. I'm always afraid I'm going to conjure a demon. First things first, none of these contain the morphine or morphine-like molecules that you may have read about on Facebook and the internet in general. The particular species, and the name escapes me off the top of my head, why am I looking at my daughter? It starts with an S, but it's not the Ceriola. It does not grow down here in Texas. It grows out in Connecticut and up in the East Coast in a few spots and over in California in a few spots, not in Texas. That being said, the sap from the wild lettuces we do have still have a minor sedative effect, but nothing, not really pain relief, except for the low chronic pain. So like if it's just a twinge that just kind of bothers you all the time, it may help reduce that some, but not an acute broken arm, give me a shot of morphine now sort of pain. So just very minor pain effect, slightly stronger sedative effect. A bit of a cough suppressant. And it is somewhat anti-anxiety, but a lot of that is due to the sedative effects. The best way to gather this sap is when you find the wild lettuce, you make a little scratch in the stem and just let it seep out and go back every day and make new, well, scrape away the dried sap. It forms a scab basically on the side of the plant, and just keep little nick, scrape up the sap, little nick, scrape up the sap. It does take a lot of wild lettuce to do anything appreciable. That's why a tincture is probably a better way of doing it. You need less of the sap to make a good tincture. In a worst case scenario, you could probably throw the plant in the blender with some alcohol or water and blend it up and try and strain it. But you are going to get more than just the sap. Really, in this one, Kevin, I would say tincture it, chop it up and tincture. Did he ask already? No. I wonder, is he here today?
I don't think so.
Oh man. Okay. But yeah, the wild lettuce, very, very, very weak sedative, weak pain relief. It's not the good wild lettuce that everyone keeps asking me about through email and so forth. Where you find it, the wild lettuces around here do like shade. They like to be in the woods, damp areas, again, kind of along ravines, creek beds, areas like that. They'll grow both in fairly thick underbrush and more open underbrush. Obviously, it's easier to collect it, harvest it from the open underbrush. It does seem to grow, like growing right under trees, right up against the trunk of the trees. So go looking right now, it'll look like a giant dandelion. And this, I was a little surprised actually to see it, but when I was out at Vista Brewing just this last weekend, there was a lot of wild lettuce out already. Normally it usually is more of a end of February sort of plant, but it's already popping up. Any questions?
We got one. What is the shelf life of the sap from this wild lettuce?
Okay, if you are concerned about the shelf life, definitely make a tisane where you basically scrape up as much sap as you can and dissolve it in 100 proof vodka. Dried, if you just take the sap dried and vacuum seal it, and then put it in your freezer, you'll probably get maybe 4 months out of it, but it's very hard to get back out of the bag, the vacuum sealed bag. It might be best just to freeze the entire plant and then do the blending thing that I mentioned. But really for long-term storage, I would go with the tincture in the vodka rather than trying to store the sap itself, just because it's the individual plants, even though they get pretty big, really still don't produce a lot of sap, and it's time consuming to gather. So, gather once, throw in some vodka and let it sit, until you need it. In that case, it'll be good a year, 2 years, really. Once it's in the vodka, it's pretty stable. Anything else?
So, someone says, I have one wild lettuce that is spiny and not so good. The one I eat is smooth. I think it's canadensis? Not sure. Can you?
Yeah. Okay. Here's the trick to tell. And I'm sorry, I don't remember which species is which. But if you cut it open, the wild lettuce, either break a leaf or cut the stem, and the sap oozes out white and then turns yellow. That's, oh, you know what? We can go to Foraging, Texas. But the yellow sapped one is the one you want. The yellow sapped one is the tastiest. Okay. Okay, yeah. So the Canadenius, excuse me, is the best flavored one, and that is the one that the sap starts white and then quickly turns yellow. And reading here, also the leaves, they are deeply lobed even at the base. So let me show you. So right from the get-go, the leaves have the deep serrations in it. The others, the early leaves will be almost like a big shoe sole. They won't have much of the serrations or the lobation to it, lobes into the edge of the leaf. So that's the one you want, and that is the Canadensis one. So hopefully that's the one you have. Well, it sounds like you have multiple, so hopefully you have plenty of that. If anything, the one that produces yellow sap, the best tasting one, I would let that be for a year or two so that the seeds from that can spread more if you really want more, or gather the seeds and plant them in a little garden area, something like that. Anything else?
What is the scientific name of the good wild lettuce with pain relieving properties?
I'd have to Google that. I don't remember off the top of my head. So yeah, just Google it. If you go over to Green Dean and his eattheweeds.com, he has a really good article talking about it. And his frustration with people constantly contacting him too, trying to hit him up for a source of morphine. So Google is your friend in this case. Like I said, since that particular one doesn't grow in Texas, I haven't really bothered with it after I figured that out. Anything else?
Yep. When will the canadensis flower and make seeds so I can spread them?
Okay, it's going to be late summer, like after the 4th of July. Start looking in June, or late June. You might see some flower buds, but it goes into the summer. And then the flowers, well, the Florida one, it has the blue flowers. Do I remember the good one? I don't have the pictures of the flower. I want to say the good one also has the blue flowers, but ideally you've already figured out which one it is from the yellow sap. Okay, anyone else?
Nope.
All right, back to the presentation. I feel it's like Stump Merriwether tonight. You've been hitting me with a couple of questions I haven't been able to answer. All right, wild violets. These are great plants, not just nutritionally, but also medicinally. You'll find these this time of year growing out in yards and sunny fields, basically both out in the sun and in shade. And then as summer approaches and the temperatures get up and the sunlight gets more intense, the ones out in the open sunny areas, the yards, the fields, will kind of die back and just retreat underground into their tubers, whereas the ones in the shade will continue really all summer long as there's enough moisture for them. So this is another plant that it is kind of a demulcent sort of property in that it's think of it as kind of an aloe vera sort of plant. The roots, leaves, and flowers all mashed up are really good at soothing skin inflammations. Like if you're familiar with plantain or aloe vera, really, either of those are also really good for any sort of minor insect bites, bee stings, first-degree burns, little rash type things. I've even had a little bit of luck with chiggers, but not as much as I had hoped. But if you take the wild violet and just mash it up into a poultice, it's really good on inflamed, pained skin. It also triggers the healing of wounds. So used as a poultice on an open wound. Actually, in an open wound, I prefer using washes where you make a tea or a tisane from the plant, in this case the wild violet, and just do a good flush of the wound, once a day or twice a day, just to knock out, well, in this case, not so much antibacterial. It doesn't have any antibacterial properties, but it does have chemicals, again, that tell the wound, that thing you're doing to heal, do more of it and do it more quickly. So it's good there. The wild violet, the whole demulcent property or the skin soothing property, it is due to a mucilaginous material. Think okra slime. And so when consumed, it can act as a mild laxative, especially the tubers that are associated with the wild violet. It's a good, mild, gentle laxative. For when you don't need a big push, you just need a little push. I'm kind of glad Kevin isn't here to talk about pushing poop. The same demulcent properties does help loosen up phlegm, so it works as an expectorant. I find the tea might be a little better than just eating it, just because if you have a lot of gunk in your chest and in your throat, eating sometimes can be a hassle, but the tea will go down quickly. Plus, with the tea, you have the hot steam that helps loosen up some of the phlegm and basically speed up the whole expectorant process. And then really any sort of upper respiratory sort of inflammations from bronchitis, colds, fevers, flu, anything where your breathing hurts, basically. If breathing hurts, try some wild violet tea, and that will help a lot. So on closed skin issues, so the bites, the stings, the minor burns, you would use a poultice and an open wound to help speed up the healing. You would wash it out with a tea or tisane made from the wild violet. And then for respiratory and throat type issues, either you can eat it some, but the tisane is a bit quicker, especially if it's still really warm and steamy. That will help speed up the process.
Couple questions.
Alrighty.
In general, can you rehydrate dried plant material for a poultice?
Yes, that's a very common technique of taking the dried plant, and then when you are in need of a poultice, just mix it with some warm water, just enough to kind of dampen it and make it like an oatmeal consistency. Put it between two pieces of damp hot gauze or cheesecloth or something, or a rag, and then place it on the afflicted area and use it that way. So yes, dried plant material is fine for making a poultice out of. You just mix enough hot water with it to bring it to that oatmeal consistency.
First, Texas Bushcraft says hi.
Oh,
So,
hey, Bushcraft.
Second, would freezing a poultice and using it as needed be a good way to store it?
Freezing it. Okay, there are some cases, especially with swellings, where they use like a frozen poultice, if you will. So you use the cold to help with the injury, and then also the poultice too. But remember, first off, when you're using a frozen poultice, the transfer of the chemical from the leg or the wound or the sprain is going to be slower. Secondly, as far as freezing it goes and then thawing it out, throwing it in the microwave, melting it, using it warm as a warm poultice, you're really better off just drying it and reheating it that way. I feel it has a better shelf life. It has, you're less likely to lose it if there's a power outage or anything like that. It takes up less space in the freezer. I really wouldn't freeze it. If you also have frozen, say like green beans without blanching them, or other plant material where you haven't stuck it in boiling water for a minute to screw up the enzyme whose purpose is to break through the cell wall, it will just turn to mush in the freezer. So you won't want to do that. I would really, really, really recommend just drying it and storing it in a airtight bag, a little metal tin of the powder, or vacuum packed or something like that, rather than freezing it. I think freezing it is just going to cause issues to the mucilaginous material and the other medicinal compounds. I wouldn't do that. Anyone
Nothing else?
All right. Wow, we're actually getting through. Whoa, it's 8:41 already. Okay, we are about average for the speed at which we're going through plants. So next one up, wireweed. Okay. Question.
One question popped in real quick. Can you explain tisane? They're not familiar with what that is.
Okay, a tisane is what an herbalist calls a tea. Technically, a tea is made using a tea plant, and if you just mix any other plant with hot water other than the tea plant, you get a herbal infusion of water called a tisane. So think a tisane is just an herbal tea using any plant other than the official tea plant, the Sensinea plant. All right. So, wireweed, quick shout out. If there's anyone from Louisiana here tonight, I'll let you know because of certain chemical properties in this weed, it is illegal to be caught transporting it in the state of Louisiana. This is the wireweed. There's several of the Sitta species. It's actually a kind of a distant family member of the mallow family or hibiscus family. Some very good ways of identifying. If you see the seed or the seed heads on the right hand picture above the flower, they look like little round buttons, if you will. Imagine that stretched out and suddenly it becomes okra. Or if you're familiar with the plant Mallow neglecta or Mallow pallifloria, I can't remember, sorry. But the weed mallow, it has that similar round seed head. Now, the fact that it is related to the mallow is not what causes the problems. The problems is that wireweed is really loaded with ephedrine. And if you know anything about, Breaking Bad, ephedra is one of the key ingredients in meth. People have figured out how to extract the ephedra from the wireweed and make meth out of it. Just a side note, this plant was found all over the world. It's very common in Japan, and my understanding was the Japanese were the first to figure this out. And a lot of the methamphetamines and speed that they gave their soldiers during World War II, because nothing makes a better soldier than a hyperactive, somewhat paranoid young male who's awake for 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row, and not really hungry. That's a really good, useful soldier. The Japanese were the first to figure this out, how to take the ephedra from the wireweed and modify it into other things. Now, the root and the seeds are the highest concentration. There is some in the leaves, but not that much really. If you're using it medicinally, the ephedra, remember that's the decongestant type stuff in Sudafed. That's the good cold medicine that now you have to show your driver's license for. So you can kind of stick it to the man by using the wireweed as your cold allergy medication to help with the runny nose, sinusy, all that sort of thing. So keep in mind the root and the seed, they are a stimulant, and they can also, if you take enough of it, and it varies from person to person how much enough of it is, it can show up in a drug test. So keep that in mind. It is a stimulant. Ephedra is a stimulant. It's pretty much on par with caffeine, maybe just a little weaker, but right there. You might have heard the term Mormon tea, the ephedra plant that grows out in West Texas. That has a lower concentration than the wireweed does here. So stimulant, decongestant. So if you got the runny nose going on or stuffed up sinuses, all that going on, it will help dry up the sinuses and help slow down or stop that. Bad side effect is it will raise the blood pressure. That's one of the effects of the stimulant. So if you have high blood pressure or even normal blood pressure, you probably want to be careful with this. But in particular, if you have high blood pressure. Variations of this are used, though, for people who have extremely low blood pressure. So it helps there. And then it is true, the stimulants like this, they do help suppress the appetite. I'm not recommending you use it for that because over time, as we discussed earlier, you will probably start building up a tolerance and have to take more and more. And so it's that much more likely to have all the other bad side effects. In particular, the raising the blood pressure. So be careful there. The root and seeds, they can be made into the tisane, the hot, mix it with hot water and make a tea out of it. In the case of roots and seeds, because they're a tougher material, you usually want to boil it for a while, 5-10 minutes or so, and then let it steep for another 10 or 20 minutes before straining out and drinking. But you can also chop it up and add it to alcohol and make a stimulating ephedra alcohol depressant sort of thing. In that case, if you're using it as a tincture, it's mainly going to help dry the sinuses and help clear up congestion there. The thing, it really shows up, it's pretty much all year round. Sometimes a hard frost may kill it, but I was finding it again up in the Vista Brewing, up in the hill country, up in Driftwood, Texas. Just this last weekend, it's over Houston, all around there. It likes disturbed areas, so it likes the edges of parking lots, dirt roads, along trails, areas that really get kind of abused by humans. It seems to go, hey, this is my spot. I'm going to pop up here. And it can grow quite large, 4 or 5 feet tall if there's no frost. It just gets more and more bush-like or shrub-like. Most of it right now, the new stuff will just be a single strand. But if you look at the flower and you look closely, the 5 petals overlap. It's a fairly distinctive plant once you know what to look for. So go to foragingtexas.com for more things to help you find it and identify it. It has its uses. Are there questions?
All right, we got a lot.
I figured we would.
First, what is a good rule of thumb for the amount of dried plant material needed for each dose of tisane? And when making it, is it necessary to use dried plant matter?
Okay, first off, the dried plant matter. Yes, it is going to be a much better effect if you allow the plant to air dry. Do not put it in a dehydrator. Do not put it in an oven. Put it and just let it hang up and air dry, because there is an enzyme when a plant dies. The last thing it does is it triggers this one enzyme to break through that cell wall that encompasses every cell. So if you don't do that, you'll have just this wall of wood around the cell, and all the good chemicals can't get out. But this enzyme opens up that cell wall, so then after about 2 weeks of drying, then the chemicals have pathways to get out into the water. And what was the other part of that question?
It was, hold on, I just lost it. It was an earlier comment, or what's a good rule of thumb?
Oh, yeah, dosage. Okay, so because of the issues from overdosing with it, you don't want too much speed. I really recommend starting the first time with a 1/4 teaspoon of dried root and or seeds. It's easier just really with the root, but a 1/4 teaspoon boiled in 1 cup of water for 10 minutes or so. After you've boiled it for a while, you're going to lose some water, so you want to add some water back. So before you start drinking it, you're back to a full measuring cup, 1 cup, 1/4 sitta. If you don't experience anything in about 2 hours, go ahead and take another 1/4 teaspoon and then see what happens. If still nothing, just keep going 1/4 teaspoon until you figure out how much it takes. Then eventually, a lot of people will go up to like a 1/2 teaspoon. Really big people can sometimes go a full teaspoon, but I get nervous with that. Hearts are kind of funky, and blood pressure, if your body isn't ready for it, if you're a little out of shape, the last thing you want to do is give yourself a wireweed-induced heart attack. So really start with a 1/4 teaspoon and see how your body responds to that, and then bump it up slowly from there. Okay, next.
Where does wireweed grow in Central Texas, and when does it flower?
Okay, wireweed, Central Texas, it grows in the shade of trees, so oaks and mesquite and cedar, especially along trails like cow trails or dirt roads. If you have a field where you drive through, there's a good chance that seeds have been spread there. It likes soil that has been turned up recently, either so birds will sit on the branches above the turned up soil and then poop the seeds into it, or they turning up the soil helps bring closer to the surface seeds that have been dormant for quite a while and allows them to spring forth. As far as the flowering goes, it pretty much flowers all year round. It just continuously flowers. The flowering is somewhat dependent on sunlight and temperature. So if you don't see the flowers, you might see a closely wrapped up little one of these beads here like you're seeing just above the flower with a little bit of yellow poking out of it. But keep watching that. It really likes to flower in late morning into late afternoon on sunny days. I don't know if that's just the days when bees are more likely to be flying about or something like that. It has the ability to flower pretty much all year round, but the actual flowering is more dependent on the weather being warm and sunny. Okay. Others?
So, I have low blood pressure and could use a booster. Is the effect in all plant parts year round?
Okay, here's the issue. Legally, I cannot give you specific diagnosis, but the wireweed, the root, has the ephedra, which is the blood pressure stimulant. I will ask you, though, if you are considering using it, talk to your doctor first. Again, there may be complications with other medications or things like that. It might work where instead of just additive, it works as a multiplier. So instead of taking your medicine and this, you get just a little more boost, you get a huge boost, and that would be bad. So please talk to your doctor for this one.
Got lots of questions.
Okay.
Can wireweed be used for cordage or basketry, and can you chew it?
Yes, the wireweed, oops, let me go back here, has a long history of being used for cordage and basketry. Is that Texas bushcraft?
Nope, Mr. Tevin Gray.
Okay, yeah, so the stem and the roots both are very tough, especially when it's younger. So it was woven into baskets and thick cordage. You can't really break it down into fibers and make fine cordage out of it. So think more basketry, lashing branches together, that sort of thing, rather than fishing line.
All right, last question is just curious, and this might be a bigger question for another day. Do supermarket veggies have any medicinal properties similar to wild plants? And if not, what happened to them?
Oops, let's just go to me here. Okay, that's a great question. In answering that, first start with the herbs. Most of the culinary kitchen herbs started out as medicinal plants. The sage, the oregano, the thyme, all those, cinnamon. I'm just mentally running through my head. Cilantro. All these things have different, really potent, really useful medicinal properties. And I'll be doing a presentation at some point on the medicine in your kitchen. Now, as far as fruit and vegetables, that gets a little more hit or miss. A lot of their benefits just come from the high amounts of nutrients in it and antioxidants sort of thing. I'm trying to think off the top of my head an example of a specific medicine from a specific domesticated fruit or vegetable, and nothing jumps to my mind right now. But that doesn't mean they're not there. But the herbs in particular, which leads us, I recommend the Rosemary Gladstard's book, The Medicinal Herbs. It's a really good overview on the medicinal properties, a lot of common kitchen herbs, and how to turn them into actual medicines for you and your family to use. Okay, so short answer to a big question. At this point, we are 8:56, so this is a good stopping point. We've gone almost an hour. Man, time goes fast here. I don't know if it goes fast on your side of the screen, but on my side of the screen, it goes screaming by. So we are at the last bit of the show where I share a little bit of wisdom with you. Like I said, it's something I kind of enjoy doing, and it seems to be well received. And for this, I want to go back to a saying that comes to me from my childhood, and it is this: the more people you can feed, the fewer you will have to shoot. The more people you can feed, the fewer you will have to shoot. And this really has been shown over and over throughout history. The better access people have to food, the less violence there is. The food has often been a weapon of war by governments and foreign agents and so forth, by ruining the food supplies, starving out the population. This is, as old as mass warfare. But on the other hand, I think the more generous you can be, the better off people are in general. Simply as that. At this point, I don't really have anything else to say except this. Next week, there will not be a show. I have some things going on pretty much every night next week that are complicating my ability to do a live broadcast. So not next week, but the week after will be the next episode of Merriwether's World. Other than that, okay, I guess you get out 3 minutes early. Have a great night, a great weekend. Stay warm if you need be, and enjoy life. All right, everybody. You want to say goodbye?
Bye.
All
Love
right.
you all.
Bye-bye.